Chief Deputy Secretary for Rail and Transit.
Thank you so much, Josh. Really appreciate it. And welcome everybody that's joining us today. For those who, I don't know if there's very many of you, but if you attended yesterday, the presentation today is going to be very similar, although we hope to answer questions that are more focused on the interests and needs of rural and small agencies today. So let's go ahead to the next slide. I'll give a quick overview of where we're going to go in the presentation. We're focused on the 2022 guidelines today. We'll be talking about some of the background of the program, typical projects we funded, the amount of funding in the program, some comparisons to the discussion draft guidelines and clarifications that we've made in this round, reminding potential applicants of key considerations related to applying for funding in this program, and then sharing some important CARB links and resources that could help you if you're considering an application. Finally, we'll get into our timeline for the program and both for our final guidelines and our awards. And then look forward to the questions and feedback. We should have plenty of time. It looks like we've got a little under 30 external participants today, and so should have plenty of time to answer your questions. Please put them in the Q&A. We'll try to remind you a couple times on how to submit questions. We'll leave a page up at the end that gives you some of the information on how to be in contact with us after this is over. And should you not be able to ask your question today and you come up with it later, please submit those questions to the TIRCP inbox that Josh has mentioned a couple of times. Let's go on to the next slide. So a bit of background on our program. We've had 4 rounds of funding so far since 2015, and $5.8 billion of funding has been awarded to 74 projects throughout the state. Much of that money is going to be provided in future years. We do a 5-year prospective program, and we also have some projects that are long duration construction that have multi-year agreements to go even further than 5 years. Our program focuses on priority populations. So nearly every project has direct, meaningful, and assured benefits to disadvantaged communities. I can only think of like a couple over the entire 4 cycles that we're not able to get that kind of designation. Our program focuses on ensuring geographic equity, which I will describe in more detail later in the presentation. Next slide, please. I put up here a few examples. This is, out of 74, this is just a subset, but this focuses on some key projects in the smaller agencies of the state, as well as some of the intercity rail. We've had projects in Fresno, in the San Joaquin Valley with the San Joaquin and ACE agencies, with the Shasta Regional Transportation Agency with the Salmon Runner Express, which is an intercity bus service that will run on I-5. Lake Transit Authority, working on a hydrogen bus and a transit center project in Lake County. There was a joint application with AVTA, Sunline, and Kern that focused on zero emission bus. And then we have an example of fleet to support service expansion, really kicking off the beginning of the electrification of the Merced County transit system with a zero emission electric bus expansion there. So there are many, many more awards. You can find those on the program page on the CalSTA website, where all the past awards are available under the program page for the Transit and Intercity Rail Capital Program. Next slide, please. Our program is set up in statute to be a competitive 5-year program that funds a small number of transformative projects that improve statewide network and reduce greenhouse gas emissions. We have a number of primary evaluation criteria and secondary criteria. I'm not going to read them all to you here, but the focus on one of the important emphases is on both emissions reductions and ridership growth. These are 2 things that are held together in the statute that establish our program, and projects that apply need to show that they're accomplishing contributions to both. Achievement of integrated service, I'll describe that again in more detail. And of course, safety, improvements in safety are also highly valued. There are a number of secondary evaluation criteria, and many of these are a bit harder to quantify. They can't be turned directly into ridership, but they certainly contribute to it in many cases. And again, we'll talk about a few of those later in the meeting. Go ahead. Next slide, please. The main funding sources of TIRCP are from the transportation improvement fee revenues that were included in SB1, and also a continuous appropriation of 10% of the Greenhouse Gas Reduction Fund. These resources some of them have been awarded, already for the years to come. So not unlike the STIP, we have a rolling 5-year program, and our next 5 years include projects that were awarded in the last cycle and the cycle before. We have $500 to $600 million estimated right now in new funding for projects statewide through fiscal year 26-27. And the largest amount of that funding is in the last 2 fiscal years of the program. But less expensive phases and smaller projects, especially the kinds that might be brought forward by the rural agencies, do have priority for funding in 22-23 through 24-25. So we've often been able to fit in a number of projects that are ready to go in the early years of our 5-year program. And if it takes a few years to get to construction for the larger projects, that's actually a good thing because it matches up better with our cash flow. We continuously monitor the cash status of our program, and when we have some of the larger projects get delayed, that often creates capacity for smaller projects or new awards to be made in the program. So just something that makes us a little different than some of the other programs you might be familiar with, and glad to receive any additional questions on that. And one thing I will point out here as well is that we are pursuing potential state assistance and securing financing of your local match for rural agencies. That's through a partnership with the iBank and looking at rural TIFIA. And while that's not completely locked down yet, we are working on that. And should you be interested in projects that would potentially benefit from that, please speak to us, attend one of the consultations during the application development period that comes after the call for projects. So let's go on to the next slide. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this slide. Much of this was also presented when we did the discussion draft workshop back in August, but these are the new emphases in the Cycle 5 guidelines. We have references to CAPTI and executive orders. We elaborate in more detail on pre-application and post-award technical assistance opportunities and expectations. We have developed a description of pathways to zero emission fleet and facilities investments that also increase ridership, reference to the role played by contactless payment and real-time traveler information in increasing ridership. We've updated the primary and secondary evaluation criteria to reflect references to pro-housing policies. Those replace other references that were previously there from HCD that were similar in nature to those, but they now have official pro-housing policies that have been adopted at HCD, and we bring those references into our guidelines. And finally, we brought in references to the CTC project allocation policy so that would all be in one place for potential applicants to see. So let's go on. Since the discussion draft was released, and this is all in reference to a document that's on our CalSTA TRCP page called the Formal and Discussion Draft Comparison Document. I've highlighted the major items in there. We've clarified that microtransit is included in the definition of transit. That was our practice before when applications came in, but we've clarified that here. We've also clarified that software and hardware related to microtransit or integrated ticketing or scheduling systems, these things are all eligible for funding. ZEV leases, if that's the way that you decide to procure your vehicles, are eligible for funding. But one point there is that you need to match your benefits modeled to the duration of the lease. So depending on how many years you're doing that, you couldn't claim benefits that went beyond it. We also point out that multiple applications are allowed from agencies, and that's often the case with very large agencies, but programmatic applications that include interrelated projects where you really lay out your vision and how these projects work together are often more helpful because it gives an opportunity to fund the parts of your program that we have the capacity to fund, and it becomes not an all or nothing on your project, on your program of projects, should you decide to submit it that way. Geographic equity, I'll come back to this again, so I'm not going to describe it too much here, but we've clarified it in terms of its impact on project funding expectations. We address how resubmission of projects can happen if more money is needed. That usually comes with an expansion of scope in new elements that need to be included. But again, we can't provide more funding for the exact same scope as was previously applied. And then finally, as I've already mentioned, HCD updated its pro-housing policy list. That's been further updated since the discussion draft with their updated policies included. Next slide, please. Okay, so as I said at the beginning, we have a program focus on priority populations. It's really important that you document both the process and the type of benefits that are delivered to these communities. That will be evaluated, with a special focus on those elements, and showing that you both have gone through a process to develop those benefits, and that you have even further processes as you're doing implementation to assure that those benefits are actually delivered to those communities. That's an important part of a successful application. Another point here that I think gets at a way of extending access to your system. Many projects have found some element of zero emission microtransit helps them get beyond their fixed route services into communities that don't have as much access to transit. And that can be a valuable strategy to expanding your benefits, especially when combined with other program elements that also provide priority population benefits. Now, in terms of geographic equity, there's a couple points I'd like to make here. Geographic equity is considered within each funding cycle, but we also look at underrepresentation of your geography in past funding cycles in considering awards in the current cycle. So if there are parts of the state that really haven't gotten a lot of projects, we do look for good solid projects that emerge and prioritize those for funding if they allow us to get into geographies that haven't previously gotten money or very much money from our program. Requirements for geographic equity do essentially limit the amount of funding that you can get on a particular project. You shouldn't, if you're in, if you're in the Bay Area, for example, you wouldn't expect to get 50% of the money from the program, from the entire, TIRCP program in a single cycle. That's highly unlikely because of the need for geographic equity around the state. We'll go ahead on to the next slide. And we have had, kind of extreme cases of this where people came in and asked for 80% of the money from the program for a single project. And I can just say that that's very unlikely that you would receive that amount from our program. A couple emphases here on clean technology. Kind of the transitions that many agencies are making to clean fleet facilities are supported by our program. We try to create some additional clarification on how to do that in our guidelines this time around. Replacing your aging vehicle fleets with zero emission vehicles and the fueling and charging infrastructure and the facility modifications necessary are something that we can participate in. Some of the qualifying efforts that make these projects also show how they would increase ridership is to improve your network efficiency with transit priority investments that allow savings in vehicle hours. That's often a way to also redeploy that operating budget into increasing service on the same or other routes that experience those network efficiency investments. You can implement improvements to your payment systems, such as the contactless payment offerings through the California Integrated Travel Program. And you can also improve your integration efforts with other corridors and/or operators through service restructuring to increase network ridership. And these are all the kinds of activities, when coupled with the vehicle replacements and facility and charging and fueling infrastructure investments, can be combined to realize the kind of program benefits that we require. Let's go on to the next slide. On the housing and job side, one of the things that we recognize is that transit supportive land use decisions are a key influencing factor of ridership. We know that your agencies don't control those decisions, but to the extent that you are adding transit service or improving it in corridors that have transit supportive land uses, we encourage you to document that, show how that supports your ridership estimates. And also, even if you can't bake it into your ridership forecast directly, show how that is happening in your corridor and is likely to make your transit system more successful. We also are interested in projects that link housing with key destinations and that improve the accessibility of economic opportunities, and then show the community benefits that you get for projects. We've had some questions yesterday that I think were interesting, which is, how can active transportation improvements around, your transit stops or transit centers be included? And yes, they can be. At some point, they may drag down your overall dollars per ton under GHG results if you made your project all about that. But certainly in terms of supporting successful transit centers and in successful transit routes, we've often seen agencies bring in some elements of active transportation to their program and their projects. Go on to the next slide. A couple notes on implementation and reporting if you were to receive funding from this cycle. If a project does not receive anticipated funding commitments, your project can be deleted from the program. And so some projects come in not having all of their funding commitments fully realized. They have a contingency that says that they're going to, successfully get federal money or some other source of funds from a local measure. In those cases, there are times where we can make an award knowing that that is a process that's in place. But if you do not receive those monies in a timely fashion, your project can be deleted. Agencies also have a co-benefit, job co-benefit modeling requirement this time around. There's a tool to fill out that CARB developed that helps come up with those co-benefits. And so that's just a part of the application process. And then finally, once your project is operational, it generally reports for 36 months. Some projects have more than one delivery date for aspects of the program. And so you may end up doing reporting a bit longer because it's generally 36 months after the last element of your program becomes operational. Let's go on to the next slide. I'm not going to go through these in great detail, but there's links here to major CARB resources on the quantification methodologies. You can see a webinar from 2019 that provides an overview of how those tools are used. And then there's a sustainable transportation benefit criteria table that is something that you will be using to do reporting, both for the annual report and a mid-year data update once we get into the period of having awarded a grant to the agencies. Next slide, please. Our timeline on this cycle is to do these two workshops. We had one yesterday and one today. We expect to issue our final guidelines and call for projects on November 19th. We have 2 rounds of optional consultations, although I would encourage agencies, especially those that haven't applied to the program, to make plans to attend both. These provide opportunities a few weeks in after the call for projects has come out to talk about the alignment of the projects that you're considering with the goals of the program and the priorities of the program. And then in the second round, you'll have a chance, after having worked on your application for a while, to ask clarifying questions about various aspects of the requirements for application. This is the first time we've done 2 rounds, and we've made sure that we have time between them. And agencies are encouraged to request a consultation at one or both times during this process. And we'll provide the instructions on how to do that in the call for projects. But if you, in the meantime, already know that you want one and want to make sure that we have that with plenty of advance notice, you are still welcome to submit that to the TIRCP comment box that will be provided in our slides, and it's on our website at any time, even prior to the call for projects. One thing I will point out here, because I think that we have some participants that have not in the past applied for the program on the call today. One of the things that's unique about our program is our interest in understanding how what you are pursuing fits into the broader vision of what your agency is trying to accomplish. And so I know that many grant programs are just focused on getting a particular project fully funded and getting the money for that resource. To the extent that you have a set of projects that you're pursuing, or you have a bigger strategic plan that you're implementing, telling the story of why you're doing what you're doing and showing how the projects work together, and how projects that you're going to be doing in the near future, even those that have most of their funding already, are going to work together with new elements to deliver a combined benefit. That is something that's a very valuable part of your application, to be able to tell that story and tell that vision. And that's often what we find people asking questions about in these consultation meetings, is like trying to understand how what they are doing as an agency can be best portrayed as contributing to the goals of the Transit Intercity Rail Capital Program. Applications are due on March 3rd, and we expect to make award announcements in June of 2022. On to the next slide, please. This is the final slide. We'll stay on this for questions and feedback. This has the website for the program website for the CalSTA's website for the Transit Intercity Rail Capital Program, provides the guidelines comment email. That is really the email that everybody can use, both during this process of, during the cycle of application, and also, if you have questions or want to join the TIRCP mailing list at any time in the future. So appreciate everybody paying attention here for the first 20 minutes or so as I deliver this presentation. At this point, I'd like to invite questions, and Josh will provide a kind of a reaffirmation of how to do that, and then we will I'll do the best to handle the questions that we have. Should we not be able to answer your question today, we will try to follow up with a written response in the near future. Go ahead, Josh.
Yes, thanks, Chad. So as Chad just mentioned, we are going to move into the Q&A portion of today's workshop. If you haven't already done so and you do have questions, please go ahead and submit them using the WebEx Q&A feature, and make sure that you direct the questions to all panelists. Again, we'll try to get through what we can this morning, but if we don't get to a specific question, we will do pointed follow-up. So with that, we can get into questions.
And while we're waiting for questions to come in, one thing that I will mention is that comments on the guidelines are due by November 10th, if you'd like to have them considered as part of our final guidelines development. So you have a week from today to get comments in, or questions asking for clarification prior to November 10th.
Chad, we have a question that came into the chat that I'll just read real quick. I just want to remind everyone too as well that if you have questions, to please put them in the Q&A section. We'll get to them. But if additional funding is made available by the legislature early next year, will that funding be folded into the current TIRCP cycle? Okay, that's a good question. And what I will offer here, and Alyssa's welcome to join in answering this if she'd like to. Is that we expect that if more money was available because of legislative action early in the next calendar year, that would likely result in a second round of funding being pursued. We would follow the guidance of what we receive in that legislative action, but it's unlikely that it would just be added on to this this funding round, and rather we would start a second one shortly thereafter. Alyssa, anything to add on that?
Yeah, thanks, Chad. I would just say, our interest is trying to make sure we move forward with funding that we do expect to have available on hand, and not hold up this initial process here, and certainly can amend and follow up in between cycles, depending on any legislative action that is taken. But definitely have a strong interest in getting some projects funded sooner rather than later. So we'll keep moving with this cycle at this point. Thanks.
We got another question in the chat. Is the second round of consultations a follow-on from the first round, or a second opportunity for consultation?
That's a good question. Also, it can be both. it can be either, the second round can either be your only time that you come in, or it can be a follow-up to the first round. One of the things that I would encourage on the small and rural agency side, especially among applicants that haven't come in before, is that you do take that opportunity for the first round, because it will help you ask questions about the types of projects you're thinking about submitting, and make sure that you're thinking about them in a way that aligns with the goals and priorities of the program. So I think that can often help in making sure that as you work on your application over the coming couple of months after that, that you're kind of set on the right course in your analysis. The second round is close enough to when applications are due that it provides an opportunity to kind of check in on issues related to topics that you may come up with as you're preparing your application. So I think that's how we kind of anticipate that those will be used. We've normally offered the one round of consultations about 3 weeks after the call for projects goes out. That's what's the equivalent of our first round this time. And because of this, because we feel that there will be a number of new agencies coming in, we also wanted to offer an opportunity later in the process, closer to the due date for the applications, for those kinds of consultations as well.
We have another question in the chat, and then we're getting some in the Q&A as well. But another one, can you provide any additional expectations about additional funding that may become available early next year? What would a second round look like, and what would the timing be?
Again, I can't really speak specifically to the aspects of what a new round of funding would look like. We do have the transportation package that was developed by the governor and the legislature last year. Some of that was in budget discussions, and we expect, should a transportation package come forward in the early part of the year, that we can't anticipate exactly what that would look like at this point. Alyssa, do you want to add anything to that?
No, I think it really, depends. We're going to be, engaging in ongoing dialogue with the legislature, and certainly will adjust as quickly as we get any information about what that might look like. But yeah, hard to predict at this point.
One thing that I will point out is, should that additional funding become available within our program, guidelines changes can be made relatively rapidly, and another round of funding could be pursued, between what would be our normal 2-year cycles. So I don't think there's a fundamental problem in providing another opportunity to seek funding if the legislature and the governor make that funding available.
We did have a couple of questions in the Q&A chat here. The first one, could we use TIRCP funds to plan for and implement increased intercity bus service and/or infrastructure on the I-80 managed lanes?
So this is this is one where the details probably need to have further discussion, but generally both planning for the implementation of a project and then funding the implementation of a project, the capital assets that are required, those are eligible expenditures within our program. So being able to buy the buses, fund some of the infrastructure, do the final planning or design, right before construction. These things are all eligible expenditures, but the details of what you're specifically looking at could matter. One thing that we often see is a project that is already getting some feedback there, but for projects that are already working towards an initial phase of construction, often they come into our program with an enhancement to that allows benefits to be realized for transit purposes. So again, the details can be discussed individually. That's one of the things that you might use a consultation for, or otherwise ask a question through the TIRCP comment box. I see another question here on can project elements that have not completed environmental review process by the application due date be included? Yes, they can. Projects don't have to be complete with their environmental or complete with their design process to apply to the program and put it in an application. One thing that I will mention though is that the further you are from construction, the further back you are in the environmental process or design process, the more risk there often is on the budget side of things. And our program can only provide funding once for the given scope that you come in for. So you can't come back 2 years later and say, now that we move further along in our project, we need more money for the same thing. That's not possible in our program. And so should you be, kind of pretty far removed from construction start, you need to make sure that you've got the types of resources in your agency that could handle an increase in project costs should that happen. So, that's, I think, the main point I would make on that one. I see another question also from Jerome Carmen asking, do we have general guidance on quantifying GHG reductions from project elements that the CARB methodology does not capture? In general, I mean, that's another example of like how to do the, one of the questions to ask during the consultations or during the application development period. We need to know the specific areas that you're trying to capture. There may be a way to already capture it within the tool, or there may be a way to get at least qualitative credit for those things, or to show that you have additional ways of modeling those benefits. We have often learned in one round things that get applied into the quantification tool in later rounds, and so definitely have conversation with us if you're seeing things that clearly should be quantifiable but aren't captured. Well, I see a question from Scott Spalding. Will the consultation rounds be virtual? That is our plan at this point. We don't right now plan to go all over the state doing meetings, with individual projects in kind of regional hub locations. We've done that in the past. I think this round we'll probably get to more of we'll be able to do more consultations if we keep them virtual. But if there's an opportunity to do any of them, easily in person, we may be able to do some of that as well. Are project management services related to project execution eligible expenses? Yes, we would encourage projects to include the project management costs in their program budgets if you whether you're handling those with your own dollars or whether you're handling those with TIRCP funding directly. The full costs of your project are valuable to document, and in many cases you have a local agency match that can pay for some of those project costs. So I think capturing the cost of successfully managing the project and identifying it as part of the cost of your app, that are recorded in your application is encouraged. Continue asking questions if you have them. Appreciate the ones we've received so far. And one other point, just to follow up on this project management side, this can be both external project management services that you contract for. It can also be staff that are dedicated or significantly charged to the project. So definitely, if that's the way your agency manages things, feel free to include those costs. The slides for this presentation should be available quickly on our website. We just have to get those uploaded and put through ADA remediation. So those should be available soon. The recording also will go through processing and be available upon request. If you'd like a copy of the recording, please send an email to trcpcomments@dot.ca.gov, and that will be provided. A link to that will be provided to you. But yes, we do have, and in the slides for the large agency presentation, the only difference they had from these slides is that they had a different set of example projects that had been funded in the past. So there's not a big difference between the two presentations. We are getting different questions, which is good. Okay, another good question. This is from Martha. Is the small rural operators price per ton evaluated the same as larger urban operators in rail projects? No, it is not. This is part of geographic equity. We look within regions of the state for good, solid projects. We are not looking to hold every geography to the exact same standard, but we do pick the projects that evaluate best within a geographic region. We also, are looking for a generally good result out of projects. So, we're not looking for something that's, $10,000 a ton or $2,000 a ton and saying that that's good enough when, the average in the state is under 100. Just as an example, kind of a dramatic example. But we've seen that kind of thing come in before, and it's highly unlikely you would get funded if your project was, $10,000 a ton of benefit, as an example. I hope that helps. But it's part of the value of geographic equity requirements on our program, is that it lets us look differently at projects in different geographies. And one of the things that's valuable is to look at the past rounds of awards and to see, kind of how some of those projects evaluated. You'll see that some of the smaller agency projects did have, maybe a medium rating or a different rating on their price per ton, their GHG emissions reductions, whereas some of the, big urban systems were high. We were still able to select the projects with a lower $1 per ton, or the higher dollar per ton value and the lower rating on that. Can project elements, okay, then scroll back down to the bottom here. Scott's asking a question about whether there's a defined set of regions. We look through the entire geography of the state. We don't have a specific geography that we define. We are looking for underrepresented regions that can be within, say the SCAG region. You could have areas that hadn't received as much funding as some of the more densely populated areas of it. And you could also have that, between, elements of the Central Coast and other parts of Southern California. So we don't have a specifically defined set of regions that are set out here. It's really looking at both where agencies are and the geography of the state as a whole when looking at the diversity of funding that we can achieve. And I mean, like, even if you have a agency that spans a large area and you're doing emphasis on one part of your area that has received less investment in the past, we encourage you to point that out in your application. So we have a number of different layers at which we can look at the geographic equity issue. Okay, we'll give it another 30 seconds or so to see if more questions come in. Jerome, you're asking whether we have a nice map of locations of past awards. There is an element of this, I think, on one of the state reporting websites, but it's not absolutely precise to exact location of every project. It's more, mapped based on agency. We can see if we can make, get available something that points to that map, but we don't have a map that we publish ourselves. This is more through one of the state dashboards that some of this has been possible in the past. And I don't know if CARB has, that specific link right now, but I believe there is a data reporting, a location where some of this has been mapped in the past. And I would encourage folks that the locations of past awards isn't predetermining where projects are possible to be funded. Some of our projects are at a corridor level, so they serve many parts of the state. If they're like an inner city rail corridor, I mean, then others are more location specific. Okay, well, thank you everybody for your time today. With this, I'd like to close the presentation. Please submit comments that you have or questions that you have to TRCP comments at dot.ca.gov and get those comments in by November 10th. That will help us to be responsive when we finalize our guidelines and do our call for projects. Thank you so much, everybody. Thanks for your time today and have a great rest of the week. Bye.